What you are about to hear is not just a story, it is an echo, a vibration that cuts across the centuries to touch the secret architecture of our world. We speak of a power so immense that it had to be erased from the annals of history, of a wealth so vast that it redefined the very concept of money, and of a secret so profound that its shadow still projects the legends we whisper in the dark. This is the chronicle of the Knights Templar, but not as you know it. Not the sanitized version from the textbooks, which speaks only of warriors and crusades. This is the forbidden history of how a handful of monks with swords became the invisible masters of Europe, creating the first global banking system and accumulating an influence so absolute that they became too powerful to exist. We will unravel the hidden mechanism that allowed these men, who took a vow of poverty, to control the greatest fortunes of the continent, to finance kings and kingdoms, and, finally, to sign their own death warrant, not for heresy, but for a much greater offense in the eyes of the powerful. They became the creditors of a world that could not pay its debt. What you will discover here is the origin of a conspiracy that is not a theory, but rather the inevitable consequence of absolute power. It is the key to understanding how faith, war, and gold fused in an alchemical crucible to forge the foundations of the financial system that governs every aspect of our lives today. Their journey is a map, and if you know how to read it, you will understand that true power is rarely that which displays itself with crowns and armies. True power operates in the shadows, in ledgers, in vaults, and in secrets kept under lock and key. What if everything you believed about power and money was just the tip of an iceberg? A facade built to hide the true engine that moves the world, an engine designed 900 years ago by warrior monks. The story they tell us begins simply, almost nobly, around the year 1119. Jerusalem, the navel of the world, had been reconquered by Christian armies. But the victory was an island surrounded by an ocean of dangers. The roads leading to the holy city were pulsating arteries of faith, but also rivers of blood. Pilgrims who traveled thousands of miles to touch the sacred ground were routinely robbed, enslaved, or massacred. The dream of salvation frequently turned into an earthly nightmare. It is in this scenario of chaos and devotion that an enigmatic figure emerges, Hugues de Payens, a French nobleman who, along with a small group of 8 other knights, proposes a radical solution. They present themselves to King Baldwin II of Jerusalem, not as conquerors, but as guardians. Their mission, seemingly humble, was to protect the roots, to be the shield of the faithful against the perils of the road. Thus was born the Order of the Poor Knights of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. The name Templars would come from their headquarters, a wing of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, built on the ruins of the ancient Temple of Solomon, a site charged with mystical symbolism and ancestral power. But here, the conventional narrative begins to unravel, revealing a much more complex and disturbing depth. These men were not mere soldiers. They created an archetype the world had never seen: the warrior monk, a paradoxical fusion of 2 vocations that, until then, were seen as mutually exclusive. The monk renounced the world, violence, and material things. The knight lived for them. The Templars, however, walked between these 2 worlds, a sanctified anomaly. They took the 3 traditional monastic vows: poverty, chastity, and obedience. To these, however, they added a 4th, an unspoken vow forged in steel and blood to protect the pilgrims, to wage war in the name of God. This duality was their strength and their mystery. A contemporary, Bishop Jacques de Vitry, described them perfectly: lions in war and lambs at home, rude knights on the battlefield, pious monks in the chapel, feared by the enemies of Christ, gentle with his friends. They were the embodiment of a radical idea that violence, when in the service of a divine purpose, could be an act of prayer, that the path to heaven could be paved with the bodies of infidels. This unique identity, almost a theological anomaly, quickly attracted the attention and favor of the highest spheres of power. In 1129, at the Council of Truths, with the crucial support of Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most influential men in the Church, the order was officially recognized by Pope Honorius II. This papal seal was no mere formality. It was the key that opened every door. The Templars were exempt from all local laws and taxes, answering solely and exclusively to the Pope. They were, in essence, the first truly supranational corporation in history, a state within states, with an autonomy that no king or emperor possessed. Their discipline was legendary, their courage on the battlefield, fanatical and terrifying. They did not retreat, for death in combat was a direct ticket to paradise. Battles like Montgisard in 1177, where a force of a few hundred knights, including Templars, defeated a massive army led by Saladin, cemented their reputation as the elite force of Christendom. They were professional, strategic, and devoted to something far greater than personal glory, the survival of the Christian ideal in the Holy Land. But while the world saw only the white mantles with the red cross riding fearlessly into battle, something else was being built. An organizational structure that combined the discipline of a monastery with the efficiency of a war machine. And that machine was not powered by faith alone. It was about to discover a new type of fuel, far more powerful and dangerous than any army capital. The seed of their financial empire was not on a battlefield, but in the desperate need of those they had sworn to protect. And so, the first great pillar of their legacy was erected, not with the stones of castles, but with the unprecedented fusion of devotion and destruction, creating an ideal of the faith-driven warrior that would define an entire era of religious conflict and secretly prepare the ground for their true and hidden rise to power. Beyond the clash of swords and the fervor of the crusades, the true nature of Templar power began to manifest in a much more subtle, yet infinitely more comprehensive sphere. Their identity as warrior monks gave them an aura of sanctity, but it was their role as protectors of the faithful that handed them the keys to the kingdom, both in the spiritual and, crucially, in the material sense. The protection of pilgrims, the order's founding mission, evolved from a simple armed escort into a vast and complex logistical operation, the first of its kind. The Templars didn't just patrol the dusty roads of the Holy Land. They created an ecosystem of security, a network of fortresses, commanderies, and safe houses stretched like a spider's web from the far reaches of England and France to the heart of Jerusalem. Imagine the magnitude of this in the Middle Ages, a journey that took months, fraught with unimaginable dangers, now punctuated by oases of safety under the sign of the Red Cross. These castles and outposts were not just military structures, they were multifunctional centers. They served as shelters where weary travelers could rest, eat, and, most importantly, pray in safety. The Red Cross on their mantles became a beacon of hope, a universal symbol of divine protection on earth. It was the medieval equivalent of the UN Blue Helmet, but with a far greater authority. The authority of God, sanctioned directly by the Pope. This quasi-sacred function exponentially amplified their reputation. The Templars were no longer seen merely as knights. They were holy guardians, sworn to protect the children of Christ with both the sword and the shield of faith. This perception was the catalyst for their meteoric rise. Their popularity exploded. Kings, nobles, merchants, and commoners saw in the order the physical manifestation of divine will, and they demonstrated their admiration in the only way the material world understands, through donations. Land, castles, farms, livestock, gold, and silver began to flow into the order's coffers on an unprecedented scale. Younger sons of noble families, with no inheritance to expect, joined the order, bringing their families' fortunes with them. In a few decades, the poor Knights of Christ became one of the largest landowning powers in Europe. They established enormous headquarters in Paris and London, which functioned as the administrative centers of an expanding empire. They managed farms with remarkable efficiency, created communities where local populations benefited from their wealth and organization, and cultivated a culture of piety, prayer, and sacrifice that inspired generations of Christians. Their exemption from taxes and their direct and exclusive subordination to the Pope made them an untouchable entity, a transnational force that operated above the laws and whims of local monarchs. This unparalleled autonomy and authority cemented their place in medieval society. But, as in any story of hidden power, this very aura of sanctity and inviolability was a double-edged sword. Power and secrecy go hand in hand. As the order grew in wealth and influence, so too did the mystery surrounding it. Its hierarchical structure and the secret nature of its chapter meetings and initiation rituals began to fuel whispers and suspicions. People wondered what happened behind closed doors, what knowledge was shared only among the initiated. The combination of immense power and impenetrable secrecy gave rise to rumors of occult rituals, forbidden knowledge, and mysterious ceremonies. It was in this fertile ground of popular imagination and rival envy that the seeds of future myths were planted. Myths that, centuries later, would connect the Templars to everything from the Holy Grail and the Ark of the Covenant, to secret esoteric traditions and sacred bloodlines. The truth, however, may have been even stranger. The Templars' role as protectors of pilgrims began to subtly transform. They didn't just guard people, they began to guard the wealth of those people. And in doing so, they stumbled upon the greatest secret of all: how to transform faith and trust into a tangible power, a power that could rival that of kings themselves. Their reputation as guardians expanded from the physical to the mystical and, most importantly, to the financial. Their second great legacy was born here. They became not only protectors of Christians in the physical sense, but also legendary custodians of hidden truths and, pragmatically, of Europe's money. This transition from highway guards to guardians of fortunes was not planned. It was an evolution born of necessity, and it was this evolution that would set them on the path to their greatest innovation and, ultimately, their doom. If the sword and the cross defined the public image of the Templars, it was a piece of paper, a letter of credit, that defined their true and lasting power. The most revolutionary and, perhaps, most dangerous legacy of the Order of the Knights Templar was not forged in the heat of battle, nor in the corridors of the Vatican, but in the silent, methodical innovation of finance. Through their vast international network of commanderies, castles, and farms, the Templars didn't just stumble upon, but perfected something remarkable: the foundations of modern banking, a system of global trust the world would not see again for centuries. The genesis of this innovation was, like all great inventions, a solution to a serious and pressing problem. The same problem that led to their founding: the safety of pilgrims. A nobleman or a wealthy merchant traveling from France or England to Jerusalem faced a deadly dilemma. Carrying large amounts of gold or silver across thousands of miles of hostile territory was provincial in practice, an open invitation to bandits and thieves. The journey was long, and the weight of gold was both a physical and an existential burden. The Templar solution was one of brilliant simplicity and revolutionary effectiveness. They created a system of deposits and withdrawals that transcended borders. A pilgrim could deposit their money at a Templar commandery in London, for example. In exchange for their gold, they received not a common receipt, but a letter of credit, a note encrypted with a complex cipher known only to the order. With this light and discreet document in hand, they could travel across Europe and the Levant with practically no cash. Upon reaching their destination, say, Jerusalem, they would present themselves at another Templar house, show their note, and, after the code was verified, received the equivalent amount in local funds, minus a fee for the convenience and security. In essence, this was one of the earliest examples of a check or an international bank transfer. It was a system that replaced the risk of physically transporting wealth with the abstraction of trust, and no one in Europe inspired more trust than the Templars. This system, born to serve pilgrims, quickly expanded to a much more powerful clientele: kings and nobles, constantly in need of funds to finance wars, build castles, or simply maintain their extravagant lifestyles. saw the Templars as the ideal financial institution. They trusted the order because it was seen as incorruptible, backed by papal authority and a military might that guaranteed the security of their deposits. The Paris Temple and the London Temple were not just military and religious headquarters. They became the vaults of Europe, the continent's first de facto banks. They managed estates for absentee nobility, collected taxes for monarchs, and safeguarded royal treasuries. Figures like King Louis IX of France and King Henry III of England relied heavily on Templar financial services to manage their kingdom's finances. The sophistication of their system was astonishing for the Middle Ages. They managed accounts, transferred money across borders with remarkable efficiency, and developed a reliable credit system centuries before Renaissance bankers like the Medici became famous. Some historians argue that the Templars indirectly laid the groundwork for international banking, government treasuries, and even the concept of paper money. It was a system built on trust and divine authority, a perfect solution to the dangers of the medieval world. But this very trust, this aura of incorruptibility, transformed them into something their founders never imagined. So, to operate and thrive in a world of indebted kings and constant wars, they didn't just guard the money, they put it to work. They became the silent masters of the European economy, and with that, they sowed the seeds of their own destruction. Their financial success, the pinnacle of their ingenuity, became the catalyst for their fall. Their wealth and independence made them indispensable, but also dangerously powerful in the eyes of monarchs who were drowning in debt to the order itself. The greatest debtor of all, King Philip IV of France, realized a dark truth. It was easier to destroy the creditor than to pay the debt. The Templars' financial power, once their greatest achievement, would become the explicit reason for their annihilation. The transformation of warrior monks into the architects of a financial system that outlived them by centuries is perhaps their truest and most tragic legacy, a timeless lesson on how innovation can lead to power, and power to envy and ruin. If this dive into the hidden origin of Templar power has awakened your curiosity, leave a like to help us continue unraveling these mysteries. The Templars' rise to unparalleled economic and political power was no accident of history. It was the logical and inevitable consequence of the unique structure they had created. By becoming the bankers of Christendom, they ceased to be merely a military or religious order and transformed into the central nervous system of Europe. They were the only truly pan-European institution, a network of power, trust, and information that transcended the unstable borders of feudal kingdoms in constant conflict. Their direct and exclusive subordination to the Pope was their shield and their legal sword, while kings and princes were subject to local laws, political alliances, and the pressures of their barons. The Templars operated in a different dimension. They paid no taxes to any monarch. Their properties, scattered across every kingdom, were sovereign territories of the order. Their members could not be tried by secular courts. This unprecedented autonomy made them the safest depository for the wealth of the nobility and royalty. When Philip Augustus of France departed for the Third Crusade, to whom did he entrust the royal treasury of his kingdom? Not to a relative or a nobleman, but to the Paris Temple. The Templars became, in practice, the national treasury of France and several other crowns. They were not just passive guardians of wealth, they were active managers, investors, and creditors. Their vast landholdings were not idle fiefs, but centers of agricultural and commercial production, managed with almost industrial efficiency, generating a constant cash flow that fueled their operations and increased their capital. They owned fleets of ships, controlling trade routes in the Mediterranean. They lent money at interest, a practice officially condemned as usury by the Church, but which the Templars circumvented through ingenious contractual technicalities, such as renting properties or estimating potential losses. Kings needed money to finance wars, and the Templars were the most reliable and discreet source of credit. Medieval Europe was a mosaic of unstable kingdoms and fragile loyalties, where a king's word could change with the wind. But the Templars created a network of trust and obligation that was stronger than steel and more enduring than any dynasty. So, they became the only stable institution on a volatile continent, the silent gear that kept the Christian world running. This power, however, was of a fundamentally different nature from the power of kings. It was not based on bloodline or territorial conquest, but on organization, information, and capital. A king ruled through force and the sworn loyalty of his vassals. The Templars governed through ledgers, debt contracts, and a chain of command that answered to a single master in a distant location. They were, in essence, the first corporate state in history, a supranational power whose headquarters was not on a map, but in its vaults and its network of influence. This reality began to create an unbearable tension in the power structure of Europe. Monarchs began to realize that although the Templars were their bankers and allies, they were also an entity they could not control, a parallel sovereignty operating within and across their own kingdoms. The gratitude for the security and credit the order offered began to sour, turning into resentment and, finally, fear. Their financial power was so deep, their network so vast, that they could influence the destiny of kingdoms, financing the rise of one monarch or the fall of another. They didn't need armies to conquer a country. They could do it with a pen and an account book. And this perception that there was a power greater than the crown, a power that could not be seen but was felt everywhere, was what began to seal their fate. The architecture of their empire was magnificent, but it was built on a fatal geological fault. The growing ambition of the nation-states they themselves had helped to finance. Every great power carries within it the seed of its own destruction. For the Knights Templar, that seed was their unimaginable wealth and the absolute independence it afforded them. The same financial power that elevated them above all the kings of Europe became the anchor that would drag them into the abyss. The admiration that once surrounded them began to give way to a much darker and more corrosive sentiment. Envy, greed, and fear became the lenses through which indebted monarchs viewed the order, and no monarch was more ambitious, more ruthless, and more deeply indebted to the Templars than King Philip IV of France, known as the Fair. Philip was an architect of the modern state, a king who sought to centralize power in the crown and forge a French national identity. In his worldview, there was no room for a supranational power that did not bow to his authority. The existence of an order so wealthy and autonomous within his own borders was not just an inconvenience. It was an existential affront to his sovereignty. The Paris Temple, the order's fortress and headquarters in the city, was a visible and opulent symbol of this rival power. It was the financial center not only of France but of much of Europe, and it was beyond the king's control. But Philip's problem was far more personal and pressing than mere political ideology. He owed a colossal fortune to the order. Years of costly wars against England and Flanders had emptied the royal coffers. The Templars were his main creditors. For a monarch who saw himself as the absolute ruler of his kingdom, the position of a debtor was an unbearable humiliation. Every gold coin in the temple's vaults was a reminder of his dependence. He realized that the destruction of the order offered an elegant and brutal solution to multiple problems at once. It would eliminate his crippling debt, allow him to confiscate the Templars' vast riches to replenish his treasury, and crush a rival power center, consolidating his own authority absolutely. The diabolical genius of Philip's plan was understanding that he could not attack the Templars for financial reasons. That would be seen as an act of tyranny and greed. He needed to destroy the very basis of their power, their aura of sanctity. He needed to transform the poor Knights of Christ into monsters, heretics, and enemies of the faith. The conspiracy began to be woven in the shadows with the help of his ministers, notably the cunning and merciless Guillaume de Nagarette. They needed an ally within the church, someone who could lend an appearance of legitimacy to their attack. And they found him in the figure of Pope Clement V, a Frenchman who owed his election to Philip and who had recently moved the papacy from Rome to Avignon, becoming, for all intents and purposes, a pawn on the French king's chessboard. the stage was set for one of the greatest betrayals in history. The wealth of the Templars, accumulated over 200 years of service, trust, and innovation, had become their greatest crime. The power they wielded, a power that had stabilized Europe, was now seen as a threat that needed to be eradicated. What if the real sin was not heresy, but financial independence? Which power is more feared by a tyrant, that of a sword, or that of a ledger he cannot control? The question echoes through the centuries, and the answer was about to be written in the blood and ashes of the Order of the Temple. The storm, which had been brewing in secret for years, finally broke with a precision and brutality that shocked Christendom. The operation to dismantle the Order of the Knights Templar was not a war, but a meticulously planned execution, a conspiracy carried out with the precision of a clock and the savagery of the Inquisition. The day chosen for the attack was Friday, October 13th, 1307. At dawn, throughout France, agents of King Philip IV, carrying sealed orders, acted simultaneously. Knights Templar, including the Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, were dragged from their beds, arrested, and chained. The speed and coordination of the operation were absolute, designed to prevent any attempt at resistance or escape. The order that was the pinnacle of medieval military organization was caught completely by surprise. The initial shock of the arrests was immediately followed by an overwhelming propaganda campaign designed to poison public opinion and justify the king's actions. The accusations, formulated by Philip and his counselors, were a catalogue of horrors calculated to provoke maximum revulsion. The Templars were not accused of financial or political crimes, but of heresy, the most serious offense possible in the medieval world. It was alleged that in their secret initiation ceremonies, the knights were forced to deny Christ, spit on the cross, and worship a pagan idol, a mysterious bearded head called Baphomet. They were accused of institutionalized sodomy and all manner of blasphemy and depravity. These accusations were a psychological weapon. They were intended to destroy the order's reputation so completely that no one would dare defend it. The shield of sanctity that had protected them for 2 centuries was shattered overnight. With the knights chained in dungeons, the next phase of the conspiracy went into action: the extraction of confessions. Under the direction of inquisitors, the Templars were subjected to systematic and unspeakable torture. The rack, the wheel, the burning of the fetal, the cruel methods of the Inquisition were employed to break the will of men who were famous for their courage on the battlefield. Deprived of sleep, starved, and in excruciating agony, many confessed to the absurd crimes they were accused of. The Grand Master himself, Jacques de Molay, an old man, confessed under torture, only to recant later. Pope Clement V, initially hesitant, was pressured by Philip to endorse the persecution. He issued a papal bull, Pastoralis Preeminentia, ordering all monarchs of Christendom to arrest the Templars in their territories and confiscate their properties. Although the persecution in other countries, such as Portugal, England, and Aragon, was far less severe, the blow in France was fatal. The process dragged on for 5 years, a macabre spectacle of show trials and confessions extracted under duress. In 1312, at the Council of Vienne, pressured by Philip's military might, which surrounded the city with his troops, Clement V officially dissolved the Order of the Knights Templar, not by conviction, but by an administrative decree, claiming the order's reputation was irredeemably tarnished. The final act of this tragedy took place on March 18, 1314. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Order, along with Geoffroy de Charny, preceptor of Normandy, was taken to a small island in the river Seine in Paris to be burned at the stake as a relapsed heretic. Legend holds that, amidst the flames, Molay proclaimed his innocence and that of the Order and cursed his tormentors, summoning King Philip and Pope Clement to meet him before the judgment of God within a year. Whether legend or not, the truth is that Clement V died just a month later, and Philip IV perished in a hunting accident before the year was out. The order was extinct, its power broken, its leaders turned to ash. But the extinction of a physical body is not the end of an idea. And from those ashes, a far more enduring and mysterious legacy was about to be born. Despite its official dissolution and the brutality of its suppression, the extinction of the Knights Templar was, in many respects, the beginning of their immortality. Philip IV's conspiracy succeeded in destroying the Order's organizational structure, but it failed spectacularly to erase its legacy. In fact, the abrupt, unjust, and mysterious nature of its fall created a narrative vacuum that centuries of myths, legends, and speculation would rush to fill. The first and most enduring legacy is, paradoxically, the least remembered. Their financial innovations, the banking methods they pioneered, did not disappear with them. The techniques of credit, international transfers, and asset management were absorbed by Italian bankers and the Order of Hospitallers, who inherited many of the Templars' properties. The seed they planted blossomed, influencing the development of the modern economy in ways we barely recognize. Every check we sign, every electronic transfer we make, every concept of a multinational corporation that operates above the laws of a single country is a distant echo of the system the warrior monks created 900 years ago. They were the invisible architects of our financial world, but it is the hidden, the whispered legacy that ensures their permanence in popular culture. The hunt for the Templar treasure began almost immediately after their fall. Where was the immense wealth that was never found in the vaults of Paris or London? The legend that the Templar fleet escaped the port of La Rochelle on the night before the arrests, laden with gold, silver, and perhaps something far more precious, still fuels the imagination today. What was this treasure? Was it sacred relics, like the Holy Grail, which some believe they found beneath the Temple of Solomon? Was it the Ark of the Covenant? Or was it forbidden knowledge, a secret about the true nature of Christianity? Perhaps even a sacred bloodline, so dangerous that church and state had to unite to silence it forever. These questions transformed the Templars from a historical order into an archetype. They became the guardians of lost secrets, the protagonists of a secret history of the world. This fascination led to their adoption by various secret and fraternal societies. In the 18th century, Freemasonry, in its search for an ancient and noble lineage, incorporated Templar degrees and symbolism into its rituals, creating the myth that the order had survived secretly underground. This connection, though historically tenuous, cemented the image of the Templars as holders of esoteric wisdom. And in modern times, from the literature of Umberto Eco and Don Brown to cinema and video games, they remain the ultimate symbol of ancient conspiracies, hidden power, and the eternal search for truth. Their story serves as a timeless lesson and a somber warning about the perilous intersection of wealth, power, and political envy. They show us that power which challenges established structures, whether financial, spiritual, or military, will always attract the fear and wrath of those who cling to the status quo. In the end, the Knights Templar may have vanished 7 centuries ago, but their shadow, cast by the flames of Jacques de Mollier's pyre, has never left us. If you have felt the power of this historical echo and wish to continue unraveling the great mysteries of the past, subscribe to our channel. Your journey into veiled knowledge is just beginning. What does this mystery awaken in you? Ritual of reflection for the day. Today, when handling money or using a digital payment method, pause for a moment. Feel the weight not of the object, but of the trust it represents. Reflect on the long lineage of power and danger that transformed faith and trust into a global system. Think of the original guardians of that system and the price they paid for their innovation. Who are the invisible bankers of today, and what secrets do their systems hold?